So this video is about a project I decided to do on my 95 Mercedes Benz E320 W124 model. Not sure if other people have run into this, but my driver's seat was sagging, cushion was bad, but also the forward and backward movements were for the seat adjustment were not functioning. Fortunately, I've been able to set things up so it worked enough for me, but for anyone else to drive the car, they couldn't move the seat back and forth. My theory was that Mercedes will probably manufacture both seat bottoms, i.e. passenger and drivers, in exactly the same way, so I took a bit of a leap of faith, went to my local junkyard and pulled a passenger seat out of a similar year, W124. And this video is kind of how I figured out how to make that work. So took a passenger seat bottom, and swapped it for a driver's seat bottom. Again, the basic notion here is that most passenger seats, all the various pieces of equipment required to move it back and forth aren't used nearly as much as the driver's side. So it was a way of cheaply restoring a driver's side seat. A couple of quick things to add. I think that my style for these videos, which I'm going to continue, is that I'm not going to bore you with the disassembly of various components. If you need to figure that out, hopefully you can from the assembly and just reverse those steps. It's kind of a little bit of a different approach than others tend to take. The other is I'm going to apologize yet again for repeating myself, saying a lot, and make a note of this, and being mildly professorial at times. Finally, there were a couple places where things went sideways, which I've included, and hopefully you guys can learn from those mistakes and not repeat them. But all in all, I think this is a brilliant solution to Mercedes Benz is at least redoing the driver's side seat mechanisms with passenger seats. Okay, so this is the running gear, I guess, best way of putting it, under the seat mechanism from my original driver's side. The passenger side, the one from the junkyard that I obtained, is here, and it is partially disassembled. More on that in a minute. Here are the two seat cushions. Essentially, this one here on the left is the original, and this one on the right here is the one from the passenger seat of the junkyard donor. Here is the under mechanism frame that actually bolts the car floor. As you can see, it's for a passenger seat with the seat belt mechanism here off to the right. To the left here again is the motor set. As you can see, it's all pretty much apart. This is all from the donor. So these are the two seats. Again, donor seat and original seat. My original seat is it's like somebody really heavy sat on it, because it's this cool, almost like horsehairy thing here is broken and in places, which is another reason why I need to replace it. I was betting that Mercedes would design these seats pretty much the same from a kind of manufacturing convenience perspective, and that's true. They appear to be identical, with the exception, this is the cool little device they use to stop the change from falling down under the seat, is on the opposite sides on each seat. So I'm going to have to remove those and swap them over. So the way to remove them is kind of similar to a lot of upholstery related stuff. You have to remove these pins out completely and then unsnap the case. They're in there pretty tight. I happen to just use a a little bit of a hack job. I used some cutters to give me the angle and to be able to grab onto it. It seemed to work okay. So kind of be careful with these guys, because even with the pins removed, this is a pretty fragile piece of equipment, and I ended up being able to lever it out, but this thing is a little fragile, so be careful. Fortunately, I don't need this one. It's not broken, but it was kind of interesting. I guess as a sub note here, one of the things that I found with this is that given that the donor seat is a donor, it's a good idea to kind of remove bits from it first, because if in the case of you breaking something, it will not be something you need, hopefully. So here is the little change catcher on the soon to become new driver's side seat. I'm just going to tap in the 2 little pins there with a hammer. So 2 pins tapped in with said hammer, just a plastic hammer. Just a quick view of the driver's side seat back removed, with the wiring essentially for the in-seat, probably the lumbar support and the headrest motors, and also the phone, which is kind of cool. Here is the donor seat seat back, removed from the seat cushion and from the bottom frame. It's held on, and I'll show you later, by 2 hex bolts on each side, which bolt to the side of the frame. And here are the cables for the internal seat electrics. One of the things I find interesting about all of this is that I can't remember what year the donor car was. It was about the same vintage. But the seat, this is the driver's side seat out of my car. As you can probably see in the video, it's kind of broken up. It just looks really, really worn. Whereas the seat out of the passenger side of a similar vintage car looks very almost new, which is also true of the drive units and all the stuff underneath the seat. This is the original out of my car, and as you've seen before, this is the one out of the passenger seat of the donor car. Next steps here are going to be, what I've done here is remove this frame. I'm going to have to do the same thing here, pull the frame off and put that frame with these internals. Now I could have swapped over all the motors and stuff, but there you have it. Or I could have cut this off and welded it onto the other one, I guess. But this seems like it neater, and it's just not that much extra work. This is always a good time to vacuum out the underneath of your seat, and actually it's really telling how the electrics and motors and everything under there can become so filthy. It's just because so much stuff gets under there. Okay, this is the seat frame and power motors from out of the original car. So what I'm going to need to do is disassemble it and remove this frame and place it on the replace the motors and everything like that on it. There are, now it's out of the seat. This is kind of a, in order to get it off of the seat bottom, this piece here, there are 2 bolts at the back that we've already kind of discussed, and there's bolts here at the front too. So in order for these to be removed, you have to move the seat essentially back with one of the with the controllers. This is a little bit tricky, particularly if it's stopped in a place where this part of the frame is covering this, so you can't undo it. So just a quick demonstration of how to move the seat frame back and forth, you can actually do it using the car's wiring. This right here is the connector block that you will need to connect to. What you do is basically pull this down, you know, pretend it's bolted to the seat here. Pretend it's bolted to the seat. I've already disassembled it, but this should give you an idea of how it works. At the very front here, you have these two Allen bolts that hold it on. As you can see, they're potentially covered by the frame. So you would connect this connector here, which is the main seat connector, to what I already showed you, and then operate it back and forth with your door switch, and that will move the frame back and forth. You don't really have to worry about grounding or anything. So that is how in situ you can control your seat in order to get access to these bolts. Just in addition here, there are two missing pins here, and that's the electrics for the seat back, which is removed, and later on I'll show how to reconnect that. So the original seat frame on the bench, I'm going to remove nuts and bolts here, 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 and here. In order to get this nut out, the easiest thing to do is temporarily remove the control unit. And right here, these are, you can see right here, are 7mm. So I'm just going to remove those two bolts, pull this out of the way so I can easily access that securing bolt. So okay, the control unit is now just pulled back a little bit, which gives access to. Now those nuts and bolts are almost all off. Got one more here. You know, I love tools like this little stubby Milwaukee impact wrench, but be really careful with them. I nearly stripped off one of these nuts being lazy and using that rather than using a proper ratchet and doing it by feel. Note that there are these washers here. I think there's one on the other side as well. Can't really tell from here. But for some reason Mercedes want you to use this washer, so be careful not to lose it. So now that all the bolts are removed, you can remove the side rails here, and the whole thing will fall apart. Once you remove the frame from here you have to kind of disassemble the motor slightly. I just have to extract this bolt here, which I'll put back in for now. On this side, same thing right here. This is the direction of the bolt, and same thing here at the front. At this point, the whole thing should just lift away. So the frame I just pulled off is what we need. This is the driver's side frame. The original seat mechanism here, I'm just gonna kind of stitch it back together a little bit, and it becomes spare motors and drives and things like that. What I'm going to do here, I don't know if it's a recommendation or not, is I'm going to leave this and all the nuts and bolts approximately where I pulled them out and use that as reference for reassembling of the rebuild. Note to self here, on this side of the frame, this particular runner here has a little bit of an angle bracket under the cog there, and if that comes out, it's a little tricky to get it back in. On the one I'm working, on the new one, I was able to slide it back in, but there is under here a little it's kind of an L-shaped bracket that clips in. I'll show you guys, whoever's watching this, fits in right here, partially out there, the little L bracket. Can be a little tricky to slide back in, but nothing, no big deal. Okay, after much effort and gnashing of teeth, the reassembly is starting to happen. Getting the frame in between the slider mechanism and the kind of little transmissions here, it's not that easy. I think the main thing is to take it slow and be very logical and slow with it. As I was reassembling it, what I kind of realized was that I hadn't paid a lot of attention to where the default settings were for the seat. So the good news is on the on this front gearbox, it just has one motor which drives both sides, so that's fairly easy to deal with. The up and down action actually has one of these motors. This motor right here at the front does that, and it has it's synced. So in other words, the cable for this gearbox and this gearbox, which drive the up and down motion of the seat, so it will kind of tip it forward if you were sitting in it, needs to be synced. And the way I'm going to do that is just to use my handy dandy angle finder from my that's what I use on my Jeep to get axle set up properly, and I'll just use that to as to back up here a little bit. You start inserting the frame by this corner, and essentially there's no transmission or anything there, and then you have to, as I mentioned earlier, kind of angle this out without dislodging the L bracket at the bottom, and insert this in, getting these funky bolts into place, sandwiching them in. And literally for me, it just took a lot of fiddling to get it to happen. On this side, I haven't quite bolted this one up yet, but you can maneuver this transmission piece here fairly simply. So all I'm going to do is set it to approximately what the height is on this side, and then line everything up and make it happen. Okay, so it's all back in place. Getting this side to match up to this side is a little bit tricky. I kind of suspect there's really only one way it all fits, actually. Because really the only way that worked happened to match up the height on both sides and also the angle. Note that there is, on the securing bolts, there is this flat which has to line up with a flat in the transmissions. Not sure on this side that I did a very good job of lining that up, but we'll see. I guess the next step is to wire it up and see if it works. Okay, so the seat mechanism is plugged into the wiring loom. Everything appears to be working pretty well. The back and forth of the seat is working. The tip up and down part. And here, quickly, is the forwards and backwards. Looking a little bit odd to me, but I think it's working. So this is where we talk about what can possibly go wrong. In the previous segment, I could see that the back and forth motion was not perfect. And now that I'm trying to line this up with the seat itself, I can see that, well, this side is fairly good, lines up fairly well. This one here got out of sync. I had eyeballed this, but it really is something that needs to be measured. So sadly, because of the fact that there is essentially a drive shaft that connects the two back and forth mechanisms together, and it doesn't have a differential, I'm gonna have to pull off one side and readjust. So that's gonna be the next step here. The other thing that I had completely missed is the fact that the frame, the kind of gears here for the back and forth movement are actually different from the left to the right seat. Really the only difference is this little kind of knob here at the back, which is for the piece of frame that connects to the transmission tunnel. So it's necessary for that, and so to do it right, I'm gonna have to change it all out. You know, basically this is the point where you say to yourself, it'd be a lot easier to swap the motors over. I was thinking it would be nice to have everything swapped over, but actually I think that probably the best way to do this would be to swap the motors, and but there again, then you would end up using the original transmissions, which would be heavily used on the driver's side. So these trannies are probably not used at all. I mean, this whole mechanism looks brand new. So I've had a little bit of a think about this, and I think I'm going to take a break and think about it even more. But what I'm going to try and do is something really different, which is start at one side and build across. Putting the frame here, holding this part of the frame up like this, setting this gear up approximately halfway in the middle, taking this and using the L bracket, gradually working it into place, and then I plan to move this. Part of the problem here is if you try and insert this piece in, which again has this little L bracket at the bottom here that you can see, hopefully see under the bracket, under the gear there. This piece will be in your way. So in theory, now I can get this rail into place and then drop this down and line it up at the rear end. And then I think what I'm going to attempt is to actually start assembling it on the seat so I can keep everything lined up. Okay, so I have the right side, or the left, I guess, depending which way up it is, side reassembled. This side has the transmission that drives the front and back movement on. And in order to be able to line this up, have both sides line up, my plan is to install this side onto the seat frame, get it lined up, because you can't really manually change this. You need to use power to do it. If you try and adjust it using the cog here, you're forcing the transmission. However, on the other side, this is fairly easy to turn and to move back and forth. Voila. So plan now is to bolt this to the seat with one bolt, and then put the drive shaft here in place, line up this side with the seat as well, get them exact, and then put the frame in. I think that'll work a lot better. I will say though that bolting this mechanism together is just not easy. This is not really a simple way to do it. It was a little bit better to start on this corner with the frame up, but still getting it to line up, getting this cog in here to line up with the worm gear on the seat frame is tricky. It's also tricky to get the flats on these bolts, which go through here, not only lined up with the holes in the seat frame or in the rails, but also lined up with the transmission units, which also are accommodating for that flat. So that's just some fun. And like I said, I don't think there's a simple way to do it. It is helpful to take a pen and mark the thread here. Oh, sorry. It is easy to take a pen, mark the thread here in line with the flat, so you can get a sense of where it is. Okay, after much gnashing of teeth, was able to get this side on, and then started working on this side. It still is pretty tricky to do two things. I mean, what I did here was I got this on, I put in the locating bolt, which essentially lines up this runner in the right place. I made sure that the holes in the back lined up, where the seat back is going to bolt in later, and noted where the runner was. There's actually a little indentation here, and so I lined up the runner with that indentation. Then came to this side, and after much fiddling, lined up manually before I added all of this. I lined up the runner, and so it looks similar to the other side. And then, holding everything together, I inserted the drive piece here into kind of the prop shaft there. This is an example of one off of the car. So you can just kind of move this around slightly so that it will line up. Now that what we have, after again much fiddling, we have the back and forth motion of the seat synchronized between the two sides. So now I can go ahead and line this up with the other side to make sure that's kind of pretty much on the same plane there, and stitch it back together, and I think that pretty much will work. So this is the construction essentially of the running gear bolted to the seat. I started on this side, lined up this bolt and the seat back bolts in the back, and worked my way over to this side. Okay, next up is to use the two little 9mm bolts to reattach the motor assembly here. This cross piece needs to go into place. Then this transmission and the seat rail need to be lined up and installed. Okay, so this transmission here is lined up, or a little gearbox. I eyeballed the cog placement here, comparing it to the one here. They're approximately the same, and did a quick look with an angle finder, and they're both approximately the same. I don't think it needs to be super exact, although I'm sure Mercedes would disagree with me. So all that's left to do now is to do this piece up and put the seat back on. Put this back into play. Okay, happy to report, I think we have a result. We have forward and backwards movement on the seat working fine. We have the tilt function working just fine. And these were the two functions I really needed to get working properly. Okay, so next step is going to be to put the seat back on. I've reinstalled whatever this device is. It sort of keeps bolts, an additional stay that goes to the transmission tunnel. Classic Mercedes Benz clip holds all of that on. The control box for the seat is held on with two 7mm bolts. It's ready for the plugging in of the seat electrics. That's pretty much it. All the mounting bolts are all tightened up and ready to go. Okay, now I'm ready to bolt the back of the seat back onto the seat. Very basically, there are two holes here and back here, also on this side, which correspond to captive nuts on both sides of the seat. Coming down through the seat, the various wiring for the phone, for the seat belts, and for the, I guess, lumbar support and the headrest. So all of that stuff needs to be fed through here to connect up to the seat controller, etc. Okay, a little bit closer, the leads are all threaded through, and now I'm ready to work on attaching the seat back proper to the cushion. Once you have the wires threaded through, installation of the seat back's fairly straightforward. Just find something to prop it up and loosely line it up, and then put in your star bolts on both sides. Like so. Seatbelt bolts in like so. Now it's going to be a question of plugging in, wiring, situating these wires. First one up is the phone, which connects out to an RJ11 jack on the floor, so I can just run that through like that. This is one, I presume this is going to be the bolster adjustment. I think I mentioned earlier in the video that these two pins fit in to this connector here. Double checking a photo I took when I disassembled it to make sure I have them the right way round into the connector. So doing that. Essentially push these guys in. Easy peasy, knot, and then push down the retainer clip here. So the red wire here clips onto this little clip here, which will then connect to a connector within the car, as does this connector. Already mentioned the phone, showing right here, And then this last connector plugs into the top of the control module. Right there. Next part of the project will be to zip tie these cables a little bit out of harm's way. I've left the old zip tie there to show where one location is, and the other one is under here. Okay, I think we're ready to go back into the car at this point. Everything is tidied up a bit. I've zip tied the wires out of the way as discussed. And what I also did was add a little white lithium grease, which is what it looks like Mercedes used in the first place, to all of these gear points. Here, 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 over here, and in here. And then a little 3-in-1 oil on the points that pivot to. So here and here and here. Which is now dripping all over the place and will probably drip on my carpet. But there you go. Actually, before it goes in the car, we have to deal with the trim pieces that fit on both sides of the seat, because we're going to do this properly. So I am going to first clean them up, because all sorts of funky stuff gets on them over the years, and then we'll go ahead and install those. There's also these funky things which I think stop the rear seat passengers from cutting open their feet. I realize it might be helpful for people to see how these things attach. So this is the right side trim piece. A view of the right side trim piece. When you're getting these things off, it is kind of tricky to get them off without breaking them, so hopefully it's helpful to see where the attachment points are. Now once you have them lined up, you can just push them into place and it should snap in. On this side, again, here's where the clips are. Here, and well, I can't point and hold the flashlight at the same time. Hang on. Here, kind of clips around here, and then up here at the front. When I pulled this off, I wasn't sure where these clips were, so one of them snapped off, but I think between what's left, it'll hold on fine. Essentially, clip it into place. This is anal retentive stuff, but basically it looks like you can just slide it in at this end and then pull it into place that way. So get the back end lined up, and then everything else should fall into place. And again, snaps into place. Like I said, here seems nice and tight, even though one of the clips is a bit compromised. I know when I was pulling these off, I kind of amazed myself that I was able to do it without breaking them, but really simply, it's this clip right here that you want to dislodge, and similarly when you're putting it back on, it just lodges into place there. So you can turn the seat upside down, get this to come loose there, and Bob's Robert is your father's brother. The original seat was really sagging in the middle, and once I got it apart, I could see that the supports had worn out. Previous owner wasn't really overweight or anything, but I think I'd just done a lot of seat time, and you could really tell, and particularly on long journeys, it didn't really offer the kind of Mercedes comfort that I've become accustomed to. So again, really excited to find, you know, for I don't know, it was like 28 bucks in a junkyard passenger W124 seat, and looks like the actual seat cushion section will transfer over to the driver's side. So talk a little bit about what I think happened to the original seat before I put it in, before I put the kind of rebuilt one in, was that this motor here, which drives the back and forth motion, had ceased to work. And the reason it wasn't working, the motor itself was fine, but this drive cable was starting to be problematic. And specifically what was happening was that if you take these cables apart, they're essentially like almost like a speedometer drive, like a square drive. where it bolts into the transmission here, it had rounded off the end of the cable, so it was just slipping. I think probably more specifically that if people, you know, kind of, these motors are powerful. This drive is not quite as powerful. It definitely is the fuse, and I don't know, people have stuff in their back seat or on the floor in the back and kind of force it, or junk gets in the mechanisms here. I think that can easily strip out these cables. On the original seat, all three of the motors seem to be working fine. And like I said, the tilt function was working fine still and all of that. In my case, rather than swapping out the motor and the cable, which probably would have been the most sensible thing to do, I really wanted to get a better seat cushion, which I was able to do too. And also, if you're going to rebuild the seat cushion, I imagine you have to take all this stuff apart anyway. So that's kind of the deal. There is a hack that you can do, which is how I was able to get the seat into use when I first got the car, and that is you essentially you can undo these two screws here. Hopefully you can see that, right here and here. Pull this unit out, remove the end of the cable, shorten the cable somewhat, and because you have a little bit of flex here, and create a, you know, chop off the end, and then your rounded end there is now square. And that actually worked for a little while until I started seeing problems with that. I think the issue with it is you can not only develop wear in the cable, but maybe in the transmission here too, which is why I wanted to swap the transmissions over as well. My working assumption here is that the passenger seat just saw a lot less use, so all the components are probably a lot less worn. Okay, this is the seat getting ready for installation. Just wanted to do some video of the wiring connections. They're pretty intuitive and obvious. The phone line, there's a little RJ11 or RJ, I guess that would be RJ11. Looks kind of like a Ethernet connection actually. But anyway, that's tucked back here under the carpet, wrapped in some foam, and that connects in there. Red to red, I think that's the seatbelt warning light. This black connector here goes to black, and then over here your 2-pin connectors click in. Try and get the light here on them a bit better. We're working on the back side of that pin connector, but there's two of them, one here, one back here. Okay, finishing up here, this can be a little tricky, lining up the two bolts. Obviously, okay, we're on the final stretch here. What I found with these rear bolts is doing something like this, of getting something to prop up the back of the seat, just so you have a little bit of room to maneuver the bolt. Otherwise, you're on the risk of, this is something you really don't want to cross thread. So I jammed the pliers up under there, and that gave me a little bit of room to maneuver the bolt and get the thread started. And also, if you look at it from the side, you can actually see it lined up fairly well, and it is just possible to get your hand in there and start the threads. I will zip up the restraining bar there for the seat belt, and replace the floor mat, and do up the bolts on the front, and that should be just about it. Looking under in here, where I had originally zip tied the electrical wires, I didn't anticipate there's a little gray cover back here which is held on by a couple of springs which connect to the kind of drive shaft. Just to quickly view it, it's at the front here, this cover here that covers up the kind of gubbins. Anyway, to get that in properly, where I had used a zip tie, which was kind of on the bottom of the crossbar there, cross member, need to be on the top, so I'll replace that zip tie, and that will be close to good to go. Well, job done. See if I completely adjust the seat according to my own specifications. Lots of different options. Doesn't have a memory feature, but now my wife will be able to drive the car without the cushion. So hopefully this was useful to people watching it. It is video proof that you can actually swap a mid-90s W124 passenger seat for or at least the bottom part of the seat for a driver's side seat, and preserve the relatively unused equipment within it for your vehicle.